So hi everyone. So welcome to our second session of the seed takeover of our Unlearning Hour. And the beautiful thing about these sessions is we don't know what will happen.
I think that frozen thing has happened.
Uh-oh. So
And some interesting So when that happens, everybody, when that happens, you all can, it's only me that's frozen. You are all not frozen. You are all speaking and I can hear you, and our future audiences can hear you. So just because I'm frozen in two senses of the word, having no fairness and having bad Zoom connection, doesn't mean that we should stop our conversation. But Janice, I don't know if you wanted to start with the kind of theme of today, which you sent ahead, which is just so cool, just to have that that text that you sent and that way of thinking about seed keeping.
Yes, let me just.
And as people arrive, we'll just jump in and just keep doing our thing and welcome them and this kind of thing. Okay.
And do we introduce ourselves first, or is that not every time?
Maybe when we speak, we can just say who we are. That might be a nice kind of more organic way of doing it.
Okay, all right. So I'm Janice Gosky. I'm the Museum and Galleries Director at Otterbein, curator of the It Sounds Like Love immersive installation. And I'm part of the seed takeover for the Unlearning Hours. And, today, sort of the priming the pump, the catalyst for the conversation is about this notion of seeds and seed protectors based on Rowan White's work, actually, with seeds and in the world. And she's just to get us started by reading a quote. Encoded in these seeds are ceremonies and seed songs and stories and lineages and migration stories. So when we have a relationship with these seeds and know them by name and eat them at our kitchen tables, then we begin to call that back into our lives again. All of that richness, all of that, those memories bring, all that those memories bring, that we would have ceremonies and songs and dances that honor the food that make it to our table, and that we would have food systems that embrace deep stories and deep connection at its very heart. And, I'm really just struck by this idea that, that seeds can actually hold memory, and that when, and this indigenous sort of reflection that when humans are suffering, actually seeds are suffering. And this speaks to the broader idea of interbeing rather than just interdependence. And so there's a lot that could be said about that, but I'd love to just see where it goes. How does this, what are the questions that people are thinking about as a result of that?
Janice, I don't know if it would be useful to, and maybe you should do it or someone else because of my dodgy internet, but just to share screen and just listen to maybe the first section of the interview, just so we get Rowan's voice among us at this time. Obviously, it's a long interview of about 45 minutes, but maybe just have them like with us at this moment would be really nice. Are you able to do that? I'm going to give you share screen
Sure can.
privileges, and then if you just share the article, which I've put in the chat, and then press play, and hopefully we'll all be able to at least get a taste of this conversation.
Okay. Y'all can see that. Okay.
Rowan, what?
Can you hear this?
yes.
Rowan White is a seed keeper from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne and an activist for Indigenous seed sovereignty. I spoke to Rowan last year for our food-themed issue about what seeds, who she calls her greatest teachers, have shown her that resilience is rooted in diversity, and that all of us carry encoded memories of how to plant and care for seeds. Over the last few months, as the topics of resilient agricultural practices and seed sovereignty came front and center as the pandemic revealed just how fragile our food systems are, I've often found myself returning to what Rowan shared in our interview. As we gather safely around the table this coming week, I encourage you to consider your relationship to the foods that nourish you and to reflect on the encoded memories of planting and care that you carry. Well, it's a real pleasure to talk with you this morning, Rowan. And I wanted to start off by getting a sense of what your relationship with food and farming and seeds was like growing up.
Well, first and foremost, as a Mohawk woman, culturally, we're intimately connected in with food and farming because of our ancestral traditions and our cosmologies and our stories. But unfortunately, due to the impacts of colonization, acculturation, displacement of our people, when I was growing up, the last people that I knew who farmed and gardened kind of as a livelihood were my great-grandparents. My grandparents grew up on a farm, but they were all part of what we call the boarding school generation. So they were taken away from their families, and the connection between the land and between food and seed from a cultural perspective was really severed. And so I always was curious, always pounding rocks and getting my hands in the earth. And my mom had a little garden out back. I used to grow these little pumpkins, and everybody always used to say that I have two ancestors in my lineage, my great-grandfather, Alex White, and my great-grandmother, Anna Jacobs. And they used to always say that there was some of them coming through in my curiosity and fascination with the natural world and with food and growing things. And when I was 17, as a young woman, I found myself on an organic farm in Western Massachusetts. And the magic of seeds and the magic of biodiversity and this whole doorway of inquiry opened up for me as a young woman. I was tasked at this particular farm with growing heirloom tomatoes. And at that point, as a Mohawk woman, growing up eating a lot of canned food, a lot of processed food because of some of the sort of, I guess, gaps in that traditional foodways knowledge, I didn't realize that tomatoes came in any other color but round and red, right? And so I was growing these tomatoes that were purple and orange and fuzzy and all these different, this whole prism and rainbow of color and diversity. And not only was I so fascinated by that particular discovery, but I also realized that not only did these seeds have places where they originated from, homelands that were oftentimes written in the descriptions on the seed packets or in these seed catalogs, but they also had people who they had intimately been connected with throughout time, that people had been in these intimate and very connected relationships to these seeds. And I think equal to my joy in that moment, being on that farm and learning about all of these, tomato varieties, and we were planting in the greenhouse, that was a cornerstone moment. I remember sort of sitting on this dusty farmhouse floor in New England, and I remember that palpable feeling of grief at the same time, of this longing of saying, well, who were the foods that fed my ancestors? What were the seeds that fed my ancestors? And so there was this joy and grief kind of mingling together. And at that moment, I told myself, I said, I want to find out the foods and seeds that fed my ancestors. And that was 23 years ago. And I've been on a path of inquiry ever since in terms of going back to my home community, asking elders and family members, what foods do you remember eating as a kid? And what did they look like? And, found some really unlikely allies along the way. So it definitely has helped me, from growing into a young womanhood, sort of really looking in this modern world of looking at who I was as a Mohawk woman, the foods and seeds really helped me to reclaim a sense of identity and find my way home, finding that purpose and helping me to restore a sense of connectedness and a sense of like a restoring, I guess is what you can say, is like a restoring of my life through food and seed. So they've been very impactful. And I always tell folks along my road is that the seeds have become my teacher. They brought me through a very unconventional rites of passage, you know, to learning who I was as a young woman. I didn't necessarily have a ceremonial rites of passage, but those seeds and foods became my aunties and my grandmothers teaching me kind of what I needed to know along that pathway towards self-discovery as an Indigenous woman living in this modern world. They helped me to find meaning and purpose in my life. And so I'm forever indebted to them for helping me in that way.
So your relation.
So I just want to say that I could actually keep listening to this, but I don't really know what the protocols are for this group. So if you could guide me a little bit, Richard, and say whether we should listen more or.
Sure, Janice. I put it in the chat because Kadeen actually mentioned a particular section that she really wanted us to listen to about memory and love, about the 24th minute. You're right. We could use our time listening to the whole thing, but I also think we probably want to talk to each other too. And actually, it would be helpful for me to know before we go to that section, Janice or Kadeen, was this, who came across Rowan White's work, and in what format did you come across the work? Was it in relation, so Kadeen, was it in, you know, at what stage in the exhibition did this interview or this work of seed keeping kind of come across your kind of practice as well? So maybe, because that means, Kadeen, you can kind of anchor it maybe in your in your exhibition and your work as well a little bit.
This is.
Oh, and introduce yourself just a little
sorry.
bit, just a little
Hi.
bit, just a little.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kadeen Navarro, artist of It Sounds Like Love exhibition at the Frank Museum in Westerville, Ohio. Anyway, yeah, so we're starting all these conversations around what the show has brought up, and as the seeds are the hosts of the show, they are we're sort of coming back down, or coming to a seed's eye view, right? So and what is the seed, what is this perspective, this new perspective that we can potentially try to start understanding through the seed, and any way we can come out of our own worlds and enter this kind of passage. This was new to me, this interview that Janice introduced to me, so I'm grateful for it. It completely links in. But so are so many interviews and voices coming up. I mean, once we start tapping into this, there seem to be so many voices coming up around this, emerging around this all the time. And it seems like they were there all the time. And interestingly enough, every time I'm hearing an interview or reading a passage related to the subject, there is this kind of notion of love, and which is the title of the exhibition. It Sounds Like Love, and it's just like this abundance, or this reciprocity, and this camaraderie, and this working together. And anyway, I'll stop there. But I also wanted to. I was very struck in this interview with Rowan White when she speaks about GMO seeds as well, and what they're going through. For maybe a later topic conversation.
I'll start playing this next part, but what you said, Kadeen, about the sense of abundance, that was exactly what came to my mind when she started talking about these tomatoes and other plants that have so much color, and that there is this kind of narrative around food, and I think it expands to other other ways that it's kind of a poverty mentality of thinking that the only safe way we can have tomatoes is to have the ones that are modified in such a way, because those are the ones that will survive all of these assaults from pests and everything. And so there's a sense that really all we can have are these couple of varieties of red tomatoes. And that's the only thing that will make us safe, and we'll have food security through that. So it's a narrative that I think we can probably question and maybe even jettison, and in favor of greater abundance, sense of abundance, and really color diversity from the visual perspective. So if anybody wants to speak or say anything, otherwise I'll play, but I just want to give a gap. Okay.
Also, the 24 point was not an exact thing. It was just that she starts touching on this subject, I felt, but I'm not sure that there's like an exact start and stop, but anyway, it's somewhere around there.
I just landed on 2323, which I think is perfect. So
the immensity of a seed and the power of a seed. I've seen and heard stories of corn dances and songs coming back through young people who've been immersed in community gardens, where these old forgotten ways are coming back again through the hearts and intuitions of these young people. These songs and these dances that were perhaps thought to be extinct or forgotten have been returning because we've been restoring our connection and relationship to seed. As a Haudenosaunee woman, a Mohawk woman, our connection to these seeds draws back all the way to our original creation story, where these seeds and foods emerged from the dying body of the daughter of original woman, right? So they came from her body as a gift to her sons, her twin sons, that said that we would forever be nourished by these foods and seeds. And so therefore it was our responsibility to acknowledge that we were bound in a reciprocal relationship to them, that they were our relatives, that we were to take care of them, and that part of their duty was in some ways to lay themselves down and sacrifice for the nourishment of the human relatives. And so as we begin to remember, right? I always think about remember as like a group of words, meaning to put things back together. You're remembering, you're putting things back together again. As we begin to put the pieces back together of our food, of the way that we feed and nourish ourselves. I think that the seeds have a lot of ways in which they're animating us and animating our hands and hearts and bodies to grow a way of nourishing ourselves and sustaining ourselves on land that honors the grand lineage of ancestors, human ancestors and non-human ancestors who went through so much adversity and joys and all the things of what it means to be human, so that we could have food and seed here today. And I think a lot of us in this movement make our lives love poems and honoring songs to ensure that we're not that generation that forgot, that didn't kind of keep that chain of stewardship and lineage alive for those yet to come. And it was told to our elders as Mohawk people that the seeds came from the sky world, which is where we came from before we came from to here, to this world. And that part of that, if we were to continue to abdicate our relationship to those seeds and foods, that those foods and seeds would go away back to where they came from. And many elders and people from our community made a lot of ceremony and a lot of prayer and a lot of offerings to ensure that those seeds were reminded that we didn't forget about them. And so we make renewed commitment in this work that we do to make sure that we don't forget, and to ensure that we have a bundle of seeds that's in better shape than when we received the bundle, right? That's kind of the inherent lesson. And we always say that in our culture, we believe that we don't own the seeds, but we borrow them from our children. And it keeps us in a really good mind to remember that these aren't ours. We borrow them from those yet to come. And so it's our responsibility to make sure they're in really good, in good hands and in good shape for when those next generations come to this earth.
I could keep going, or we can just toggle back and forth, but that was a great, thank you, Kitty.
Let's talk. I want to talk. I want to hear what people think. It's so much. It's so rich. But I want to hear. I want to hear voices. Our voices. Okay, so I'll just jump in because nobody else is. But I ran downstairs to try to get a tomato, which I thought was on the counter, but it was we must have used it. It's the worst tasting, yuckiest tomato. We got 3 of them a couple days ago. You put it in a salad and it's nothing. It's squishy and soft and bleh. It has no taste. And isn't that part of what our world has? We've been colonized by. There's only one. That idea that there's only one kind of tomato. There's only one kind of garlic. There's only one kind of corn. At least that, from what I heard on the earlier part of the interview, there are so many other kinds of corn, and some of them, as Winona LaDuca said, they're richer, they're better, they have more protein. So why have we let our food world become colonized? At least that's one of the ideas that I come away with. And then I think in some ways that I think we've let ourselves become colonized. But there's only one way to eat. There's only one kind of taste. There's only one way to look.
My name's Peter. I'm a middle school teacher in Toronto. I don't teach primary kids. I don't teach grade 1, 2, 3, 4. But I know that every year there is a group of teachers. Every year it's the same experiment done year after year after year, where you ask kids in the primary grades where tomatoes come from or where corn comes from, and they invariably say from the store. They don't get the idea of the identity of it. They don't get the idea that things start with a seed. They just think it magically appears. And it's interesting because when you get into the high school level of teaching science, the seed loses its identity. So seeds become plants. Seeds grow into something else as if they're losing their identity. And when I listened to Kadeen last Friday, for me anyways, it was the first time I had ever thought that somebody had focused only on the seed, not beyond that. I mean, we buy seed to create plants, to plant and to look after and to, watch them germinate. But I've never seen focus just on the seed for seed's sake. I'd love to tell some high school science teachers about this. I think it's pretty interesting.
I thought also in the interview we did with Rowan that she says the seed, thinking about the seed for seed's sake, the seed is yearning for connection and relationship as well, and it's been taken over itself. The seed has had a seed takeover, and it's trying to figure itself out. I'm sure that the tomato seed wants to be yummy, but it's like, oh, why am I gross now? And it's like, yeah, I think it's yearning for this reconnection, and how can we support that?
I guess I also really, I've been thinking about in the interview about the seed as teacher and the seed as ancestor. And Kadeen said there is some kind of conversation about, genetically modified foods and some of the questions of I think some of the questions of kind of purity that come in relation to, especially issues of indigeneity, and in this country and beyond, in relation to, you know, what are the questions of mixed indigenous and settler heritages, and these kinds of questions, and what, you know, what does it mean to trace, intersect, like not kind of finding the source, but somehow respecting the shifts and changes in our identities throughout time. And we can always think of our actually an indigenous artist that I've been very lucky to work with here at OSU, Indigo Gonzalez, who's been part of the Unlearning Hour before, an Afro-Indigenous artist from the Southern Ute tribe. Talks a lot about kind of our relation to each other, and all having relation to indigeneity, and that kind of sense of, it's not kind of everyone is indigenous approaches, it's more a sense of kind of caring and understanding those relations. And so seeds seem to be, a really important, and it's not a metaphor, but at least important way of thinking through when someone starts to have a discourse of purity and of true origin, to kind of step back and start thinking about, well, maybe the lessons that they teach us, or the ancestor stories, the bloodlines, and these kinds of questions are not about some kind of sense of purity, but just of almost like something about uniqueness or specificity that seems to be emphasized there. And so, yeah, I just, I'm really obsessed by this, or thinking, thanks to your work, Kadeen, and through these sessions of teaching with or learning from the seed. And I think that, but also what needs to be unlearned from when we start with a discourse of the seed or privileging the seed. Because the plant that comes from the seed needs to be engaged with and cared for as much as the seed itself or its origins, because it is the life cycle of it. And so that tomato in Terry, your tomato that you were going to bring us, we want to care for that tomato, no matter the seed it comes from, or how we relate to it now. So, it might not have it might not be its fault that it tastes bad.
I'm just thinking of, I don't know where there's just so much here, but the word that came to mind as I was listening to the interview was monoculture, seed monoculture, and that we've let our food system become monoculture, our farming practices become monoculture, and then I maybe it's a big leap from that to, I always come back to kids because I spent so much time teaching them. What was the monoculture? What is the monoculture that our kids and the kids in our college classes and the kids in younger grades are being given? So it's not a culture of abundance and diversity. It's a culture of be pretty much like everybody else. Eat the stuff that everybody else is eating because the other stuff would be too weird. And then I think it comes down to a sense of emptiness. And I'm not sure where that word is coming from, but if you don't have abundance and stories and history and songs that are connected to food, then you end up with this little kind of monoculture world. And I feel like that's what I was given. So where is the despair coming from in these kids? Because there's college students who are so full of despair. I almost feel like the answer is the seeds. The answer is diversity, diversify who we are, how we connect into the earth, how we connect to what grows. Maybe I'm connecting too many things, but it's related to the monoculture of our culture, and therefore related to decolonizing, I think.
Harry, I think you're making really good points. And it's monoculture, individuality, that lack of connection that we all need. We all need to feel connected to a family, a community, the earth. And I think that we're getting there this way. Going back to some of the things that Richard and Peter said, my students don't come in not knowing where food comes from. We're the School of Environment and Natural Resources is a branch of food and agricultural and environmental sciences. So they know the science. They know that we have to save the world through GMOs, except for the ones who come in and understand food security, food sovereignty, and respect for different ways of being and thinking and eating. So I love this group being called Unlearning, because I'm working hard on making the students who come to my class unlearn a lot of, or at least learn it in conjunction with some other ways of thinking. Yeah, thanks. Oh, and I have to say, I have to leave in about 15 minutes early, and it's not because I don't want to be here, it's because I don't know.
I did just want to take a moment to, I don't know, Juan, if you're able to unmute and say hi at some point. Juan Ceballos Aguilar is a professor in the Spanish and Portuguese department here at OSU, and is someone that has been involved in the Unlearning Hour, especially when we met in person at the Wexner Center for the Arts. I always remember, Juan, that last session that we had when we were talking about the Tree of Life, just before the pandemic hit. So Juan, if you're there, maybe just say hi to everyone, because I think you weren't here last week. So just to introduce yourself again, only if you're able to unmute. Maybe he's not able to unmute, maybe he's there, but Leonardo's joined us too. So we get to have his input as well. Hi, Leonardo. You're muted.
Sorry, this time I'm not going to my office. I'm doing right from I just finished my class. So I'm just staying right here, get more time. Thank you.
Yeah, so so again, I mean, this is great. So, Vicky has to leave in a bit, Leonardo arrives here. Thanks, Juan. Juan's writing some comments in the chat, just that it says there's noise at home. Yeah, I'm having the furnace put in right now, so there's going to be noise where I'm coming from. But yeah, I was just reminded, seeing your name there, Juan, that you were there in that session where we were talking about the Tree of Life. And so it just kind of made me circle back to our discussion of seeds that we're talking about today. Anyone want to catch Leonardo up on what we've been talking about so far, just to kind of get him on point? Go on, Terry, you can do it.
But there's like 16 different ideas floating out there. But I think we were listening to give me your name again, Robin White, right? She's been a seed saver, and she was talking about her heritage of growing up and her grandmother having a garden and her digging in the dirt, and her sense of feeling, starting to feel that there's stories within the seeds that she was planting. So she felt that we can reach out to those seeds, find the songs within the seeds, the stories within the seeds that have been so much erased by, and I'm going to throw in my word, monoculture of our time, and that she's asking us to embrace that bigger world with more abundance and more love and more connection to seeds, and thinking of seeds as these entry points or these memory points. I don't know. That's my best attempt.
I don't know if this is going off topic, but I'm having this thought about the seed being so full, actually, like so whole, and because we're talking about memory, that they're holding time and memory and song and ritual and dance and movement and all of these things. And then at the same time, we're talking about we were talking about the monoculture and then emptiness. And then I was just thinking of this whole and emptiness. And then I was thinking about the seed I'm not sure where I'm going with this yet, but my mother just sent me a Buddhist passage on emptiness. And maybe I could just read out the first part, because it's the other side of emptiness, which is, anyway, in emptiness, forms are born. When one becomes empty of assumptions, inferences, and judgments he has acquired over the years, he comes close to his original nature and is capable of conceiving original ideas and reacting freshly. And this is tenet 8 on emptiness, looking at a scroll of by Niten, Zen meditation, calligraphy of a worm crawling up a blade of grass or something. And anyway, diverging off it, but I'm just thinking about wholeness and emptiness, and then the role of the seed in all of this, in all of these ideas.
Dean, could I ask, I just, when you were reading that and thinking about emptiness, I've been thinking a lot recently about openness, and how to be open to what comes might, you know, I see the kind of associations there with a kind of a way of thinking of emptiness as generosity somehow. And so I was thinking about this openness in relation to the concept of hospitality, and so Jacques Derrida's text on hospitality talks about kind of the kind of radical hospitality of being open to whatever happens or whatever comes. And whenever I think about our Unlearning hour, sometimes I wonder about that element to it, like how can we, you know, it seems like even impossible to create a space within certain forms of institutional frameworks for such openness to what could come. But then I was also thinking about the space at the Frank, which I have yet to visit, and the exhibition, like quite literal exhibition space, and the horizontality, all these kinds of questions about how, and I guess Janice can speak to this too, like how, or Leonardo is someone that has curated exhibitions and like thinks in relation to creating a welcoming space. How you kind of get that balance between kind of inviting people in and also showing people that there is something in that space for them to engage with without like overwhelming, without saying it's too full or too much. And so I know it's not exactly emptiness, but I was just thinking about openness in terms of that. So maybe for artists involved with exhibitions and curators, you know, maybe it's kind of a big question. And then it's also a huge question for educators too, of course, like how, you know, no student arrives empty. Students arrive with being full of certain things before we even get to talk to and teach them.
I'm going to add my 2 cents. I had the privilege to work with Janice on an exhibit, and I think that one of the things that work quite well in terms of our approach and the way that we interacted is to first recognize the space that's available, right? That empty space that we're going to fill with content and get a sense of it. And then I like to do this, and I had the opportunity because Janice also was awesome about it, is to design for the space. So design an experience for the audience, taking the space in consideration. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to have certain frames, width and height consistent, and we'll just place them around, we recognize the space, and then we recognize that we can create an experience for the people who are going to come in. And we design and arrange the experience or the narrative of the exhibit for that space and for the people who are going to be invited to that space. So I think having a good idea or considering the space for the experience, it's very important in terms of how we fill those spaces for an experience and the interaction of a particular audience. I don't know if Janice wants to add anything to that, but that was one of the
that was lovely. I especially appreciated your use of the word recognize. There's something about recognition that's really important, something about acknowledging what is, and maybe this comes back to the seed a little bit, you know, sort of recognizing and acknowledging the seed for what it is on its own terms before we sort of smear me on it. And then I think like, as you were saying, you know, trying to create an environment or installing a show in a way that leaves room for people. So it's communicating something, it's sharing something. There's a curatorial pedagogy potentially, but it really leaves room for people to have their own experiences. So it's creating a different kind of container. Yeah, I mean, that's probably all, but I would like to sort of add one more thing that's just about to go out of my mind. So I might drop it. If I could just bring up the point, because I think this is really important in the context of what Rowan's saying. And I think some things that have been said about the It Sounds Like Love installation too, and sort of the way that the seeds are being honored. And they're being given the space to sort of take the lead. And that's this question of personification. You know, this idea that to do that is to personify, to talk about the seeds as alive or active, or to use certain human language to describe them as personification. And that's some kind of a no-no, that we shouldn't be doing that. And I think there's another way to honor and to respect more than human or other than human aspects of our reality, that isn't personification necessarily, but you know, we may be limited as humans in the words we can use and the language we can use. So I think that so-called personification is just our limitations, but it's a genuine attempt to honor and recognize. But there's something outside of the sort of just human paradigm that's possible. Yeah, so I wanted to put that out there because this conversation or this idea of sort of saying, oh, that's personification of a seed, shuts down the conversation. It just completely shuts the door on what's possible. So that openness just disappears. It's like a conceptual sledgehammer.
Janice, that's such an important point, and it's something that I try to get my students to go beyond, because some of the writers that we're reading Aldo Leopold they've made people care about things by personifying them. There's a lot of research that said even in the 1800s, people would give their children pets to give them more empathy, because when we see something that's close to us, we care more about it. And I know that's a no-no in scientific terms, but it's sort of understanding that we share something with everything. And that's why pandas and polar bears and all the cute and furry mammals are, you know, the elite animals are used in environmental ads rather than the mayflies and the little maggots and things like that, because we want to see what we have in common with other things. And oh my goodness, I've got to go. But that was such a good point, Janice. Yeah, personification is seen as a bad thing, but it can help us reach people.
And if we go to the seeds as, you know, holding time and their fullness, I don't think that's personification. That's just stating realities. Those are the historical realities. They are holding time in a way that we are incapable of generally understanding. So I think there's a fine line between saying what is historically and mythologically true and embracing it as something we want to give space to. Like the gallery actually offers space to the seeds. This is what this particular gallery does. And I think, to go to Leonardo's point, I mean, at maybe every art exhibition tries to offer a space to something that people can connect to beyond what they come into the gallery with. And like, here's a welcoming, here's that radical hospitality. Was that, Richard, what you were saying? Like the gallery that has radical hospitality is the gallery that we can most learn from. And I think we are being welcomed into this particular gallery that way, but I think that's what the seeds are doing in general, is they're kind of saying, listen to us. I'm sorry, Janice, it's hard to not talk personification.
I think bringing in Rowan White's work here, and I'm also, I haven't read it, but I've been thinking about it thanks to the focus of Kadeen's work, but Diane Wilson's book, The Seed Keeper. I don't know if you know, anyone here has read that book or knows about it. I'll just put a link into the chat, but I remember seeing it in a bookstore, and it's got it's a novel, but it's kind of recommended by, it's got a blurb by Robin Kimmerer. But, you know, and I actually just want to kind of just step back and just say that one of the big tensions, and I would say even things that we need to process and work through in our Unlearning Hour in general, and is the positionality of the non-Indigenous in relation to the Indigenous, and as I said, the generosity of seeing relation to indigeneity without co-opting or appropriation and these kinds of things. And so the minute I started talking about openness and, you know, the question of emptiness and space, the ghost of the terra nullius, the ghost of the land that is empty, the ghost of that historical legacies of colonialism kind of comes, like, bursts out at that very moment, even when there are careful, respectful acknowledgement of, you know, the three sisters, as Kadeen, you think about the project, or of the seeds in terms of Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous ways of thinking. So as a settler, I often try to raise these things without necessarily reconciling them, because I don't think it can be kind of closed down. And what's exciting, Kadeen, about your work is its engagement and also thinking about your own positionality in terms of the transnational experiences that you've had. You're now in Ohio. Are you actually in Ohio yet? I was just wondering that.
Not yet.
Not yet, but when you get to Ohio, there's that sense of, like, you're being here, you're in this land, and so what do we, you know, who has the right to offer hospitality in terms of this, and how the seed can be a space for that conversation to start to happen for all of us, whether within an academic institution, whether an artist, a curator, and how to just, you know, how to just negotiate that in a way that exudes something that your exhibition definitely does, in the spirit, which is this bound up with love and not bound up with
Exactly.
That other thing.
Yeah, exactly. Frozen in
it's a for me, and one I time my freezes to the best moments.
You do.
Yeah.
Created freezes.
Bring a quote from the selection that I think Janice sent out from Rowan, that I thought I'd love to get people's take on, especially since it's about decolonizing, and since that was the original, the unlearning colonial ways. we are all indigenous to somewhere, and we're all called in this time to be an inquiry about decolonizing ourselves and our relationships. And that process is multisensory. We can't just think our way out of the predicament that we're in. It really requires us to reimagine the way in which we engage the world from a multitude of senses. And I just wondered what others saw in that, but I highlighted, we have to be inquiry about decolonizing ourselves, and it has to come not just through thought, but somehow through the sensory, and that's what happens in the space. Is you're sitting on the ground. You're not just localized to the eyes, and that's what our world has become, just a bunch of visuals that flash around on screens. No, this is asking us to recenter ourselves within the sensory nature of the world. Anyways, I guess my question really is somewhat to you, Richard, is you invited in this seed takeover. What's it doing to the whole unlistening, process? Is it what layers? But I'd be welcoming anyone to say just even to say a little bit more about that interchange between decolonizing ourselves and the seeds.
Just an immediate response, Terry, to that, and that seems to be coming from the tradition that, and I think there's an article that's kind of just very vital because of the kind of job it does quite quickly in pushing settlers out of a certain kind of comfort zone, which is Eve Tuck and Kay Wayne Yang's Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And that article, which I often teach at the beginning of classes, even though it's very relentless, it's a very challenging article, talks about, there's a section in it that's called Decolonize Your Mind and the Rest Will Follow. And it critiques this idea of the decolonizing of the mind, because, and not to that point, which Rowan White points to, which is that the sensory is important, but it's more about praxis and action and these kinds of questions. So it's not just about freeing oneself, and this is in a tradition of like Paulo Freire's emancipatory liberation theology and educational practices, but more in line with Frantz Fanon's decolonization as kind of violent rupture, and this kind of issue. So I'm presuming that Rowan White is coming from that position, but the shift that's new for me is the sensory. That isn't something where usually it turns into decolonization has to be about the repatriation and reparation of indigenous land and sovereignty, but not like, what about the sensory that you're describing it? Well, maybe it is about a change of relation that incorporates the sensory as a way of knowing that has been lost because of imposed, especially rationalizing discourses.
In her work on social presencing theater, Arwana Hayashi talks about embodiment and sort of listening to the body as a kind of a little act of it's a social justice move to actually come into the body and to actually listen to its intelligence. And I think that feels really in line with what Rowan's saying. And it's critical at this time. It brings up a lot of questions about what is the intelligence of the body, and what does that mean? We say it a lot and we use that language a lot, but what does that actually mean? What are we speaking about or pointing to, and what does that have to do with the intelligence of the seed?
I think this is such a critical point, actually, and it is about dropping into that sensory space. And I think I have been thinking a lot about listening and what is listening, and what is how can we listen through our body, and through with to our body, and as a vehicle, antenna, whatever, to connect I think it's the only, I mean, for me, I'm feeling like it's the only way that I can try to connect with the seed, for example, is through these different sensory mechanisms.
So something that we can use the last few minutes of this session to do is, so I was very grateful to get kind of a sense of what we might jump into next time before. And I don't know, again, this is an open forum in the sense of like, things can arise from the very conversation that we have. We don't have to set a kind of reading or set something to kind of look into each time. But given how many layers your work has, Kadeen, and how the seed takeover is kind of anchoring our conversations, if there's somewhere that you want us to go or to focus on for next time, just to start that seed here, you don't have to think about it now, but think about what it would mean to share that next time for and any participant. It's not, we don't put all the work on an artist to come up with the work. So if something comes up or a thread that we want to just follow, because there'll be different people and there's different kind of shifts as we move through this. We can also use these sessions to plan. I know that I owe you an email, Terry, about the kind of organizing the visits that you're having. Maybe even we could start next session with saying, well, what's in place already or what's happening already? Maybe, or do you think by next time you'll have arrived in Ohio, Kadeen?
I think so, yes. Yes, I'm due to come on Sunday. Oh, are you frozen? Yes.
Celebrate that moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that we could celebrate that moment, that we can celebrate your arrival in our region. But yeah, just to kind of think about things we might want to take up next time, and then but just send them to me and to anyone else that is sending out word about the Unlearning Hour.
Terry, I just want to acknowledge something that Rowan said, that we can make our lives love poems. And I thought of you, of course. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And there's something about that, an embodied human.
I mean, I'll just also say that one thing that's been on my mind for quite a few months is that I think our sense of love has been colonized very much of what is love, and it's only this Hollywood version, and people spending tens of thousands of dollars on weddings, and we get packaged into a certain way, whereas the love that I'm hearing here from the seeds is so much richer and so much deeper and has so much more history and engagement. And so maybe that's part of what we need to bring back is a revitalized sense of love being something much richer and more, less connected with our little minds and more connected with the little things like seeds that hold all of time. I mean, it seems like a revisiting, but anyways, I'm going on. Yes, thank you. Yes, love songs or love poems.
Well, we're at our hour, and I know it's annoying because we could, just as we could listen to the whole conversation, we could talk more, but let's keep Terry's or Janice and Terry's the exchange of love songs as maybe a potential starting point for next time. And before I freeze again, I'm going to just say goodbye to everyone and say how much it's been enjoyable to spend this time with you for this hour. So thank you.
Thank you
so much, Richard. Thank you, everyone.